Okay, so the second tool is framing. Now, framing is saying, this is what you're looking at, and this is how to engage with it. It is something that if you've ever been around young children, you do this naturally all the time. Your whole life is this. You are walking down the road and you go, look, we're about to cross the road. This is a road. Cars come both ways. So we need to hold hands, look both ways, and cross. You say, look, that's an oven. That's the stove. It's hot. Don't touch. It's hot. This is a tree. Leaves fall off of trees. You are constantly saying, this is what you're looking at. This is how to engage with it. And we forget that kids and teenagers need us to do that for them spiritually. It's a skill you already have. You know how to say, this is what you're looking at, this is how to engage with it. The kids need that stuff about God and about the world. They need to know this is where God is in the world. When there is a terrorist attack, when we're at church, when you're at school, when you're in the midst of grief, this is what you're looking at and this is how to engage with it. They need to have that framing around what God has on offer for them and where he is in ordinary, boring bits of life. And so this is something that is significant to do in your life, in the stuff that's around you. My dad did this for me really well. He used to read his Bible. He was a police officer, and he used to read his Bible when he came off duty. And so often he would come home at 2 o'clock in the morning, and my bedroom was off the dining room. It was weird. And so I could wake up in the middle of the night and I'd see him, the light would go on, and I would see him come home all sweaty and tired, and he would sit down and he would do a big sigh, and then he would start reading his Bible, and he would read for about 20 minutes. And sometimes he would take notes, and I used to love sneaking out in the morning and reading his notes. And he told me later that he used to do that on purpose because he knew that I would sneak out and read it. And I found that fascinating. I thought I was getting a little look, and he was just creating a window. And but I used to find the Bible really boring, especially the Gospels. Like, why do you need the same story 4 times? And so I found it really boring, and I couldn't really understand why you would read the Bible. And I asked my dad, I was like, why do you read the Bible? And he framed it for me. He said, I've had today, I have been to a rape call for a girl who's younger than you. I have had to pull a baby out of a bathtub, and that did not end well. I had to go to the same house for domestic abuse for the 8th time this month. And my heart and soul hurt by the end of some of my days. And so I come home and I have to read the Bible because it nails everything down and it anchors me in the truth that is the same yesterday, today, and forever. The God who is the same yesterday, today, and forever. I need to read the Bible. And it was like, oh, it just hit me in the face. This truth of how he saw the Bible. I'd never seen it like that. And he framed it for me and said, this is how you engage with it. You have a bad day, you come home and you anchor yourself in it. You read it because it refreshes you. It pulls you. It just was so significant to me. And that changed how I viewed the Bible. I started reading it. I started engaging with it better. I started realizing how much life it is, and it was a whole different thing. And he then later taught me how to engage with it, how he reads it. And so he taught me how to do it after that. But I told him a couple of years ago, I said, Dad, just want to know how significant that thing was. When you said that, it totally anchored me. And it was, so foundational. Thank you. And he looked me straight in the eyes and he said, I have no memory of that conversation. And I was like, excuse me? That was like life altering. How can you not remember? And he said, well, for me, it was just 10 seconds of parenting. I thought, wow, you never know what 10 seconds of your ordinary framing creates a foundation for a lifetime for a kid. You don't know. And so therefore you don't try to create those moments. You just explain and teach them how to engage with it, and let God weave together all those things that are important. And so whether it's why you read the Bible, who is God in a terrorist attack, or those big news item stuff, but also things like why we go to church. I find it so interesting that so often we struggle about whether we should make our kids come to church. The question is, have we ever made the case for why we go to church? Have you explained to kids what's really significant about going to church and why we go? Or even the little things that happen at church, like why we sing at worship. Because to a kid, you just come and you sing kind of mediocre karaoke at church. But have we ever stopped and said, when we sing to God, and the Bible says that God comes close to us, and when we sing words that are true, when we sing words that remind us of who God is, it takes our eyes off of ourselves and our problems and lifts our eyes to the truth of who God is and what he does. And it helps us lift our hearts. It helps us take a bigger view. It helps us connect to God. This singing is really important. And if you look around, there are people who are engaging in different ways. Some people are singing really loud. Some people are singing really quiet. Some people are just listening to the music. That guy's sitting and looking grumpy. Are you allowed to be grumpy in church? Yes. Are you allowed to sing loud? Yes. Are you allowed to just listen to the music? Yes. If you want to read the words and then just say yes to the words you mean, great. And if you want to read them first and then sing the second time, that's okay. If you just want to close your eyes and pray, that's okay. There's lots of ways in engaging in the singing part of church, because God comes close and we get to meet with him. Have you ever explained that to a kid? There are so many things that need to be framed for them, from what we do at church to how we engage with people who don't know Jesus, that this is what you are looking at, and this is how to engage is an important part of that. And so I guess I just want to challenge you about the framing. There are so many things that you could frame for your kids. What do you think your kid needs framing for them? What are they not engaging with well, that you think maybe actually what they need is someone to say, this is what it is, and this is how to step into it. This is how to engage with it. It's the how that is really helpful too. There was a mom who brought her kid to a prayer meeting, and not on purpose, but just sort of like the parent wanted to go and the kid has to, lump it. And the kid came and had like a video game thing. And during the prayer meeting, somebody started crying over there. And the kid looked up and said, "What's going on? Like, why is she crying?" The parent thought, "Oh yeah, I haven't framed this for you yet." And so said, "Oh, well, stuff happens in our life that makes us sad. And when we talk to God about it, we can feel quite vulnerable because God can see all those bits of our heart and stuff. And it makes you realize how much you actually want help." And so over there, you can see that she's crying because something's happening in her life. I know what it is, but it's not something you need to know about. But and people are around her and are praying for her because what they just want to say is, "God help her, and God give her what you need and what she needs from you." And that's what's happening over there. The kid's like, "Oh, okay." And then the parent was like, "I did a good job." And then a little bit later, the parent turned around, the kid was gone, and she was like, "Where'd my kid go?" And she looked over, and her kid was over there praying for someone. This little 8-year-old was over there praying for someone because she thought that she remembered that this guy, I think his wife was sick, something like that. And she thought he needs God. And so went over and started praying for him. Before, she was just sitting there, disengaged. But once a parent framed for her what was going on and showed her how to engage with it, she was able to do it on her own. What do your kids need framing for? And what do they need to see where God is and how to engage with it? The second tool, the third tool, we're on number 3. The third tool is this: unwinding warped views of God. Our kids go through life trying to pull together a picture of who God is. and they take what they've read from the Bible and what we taught them at church and what Bible stories you read to them at home and what their friend said at school and the YouTube video that they kind of saw and the thing from the television program. They put it all together and then sort of get this view of God that sometimes has a little bit of warp in it. And I think we're all on that journey. We all sort of have a little bit of warp in how we view God. And when they do that, it means sometimes they're not even picturing the same God that you and I have, because they can put those views together in kind of warped views. Common views that kids have, for instance, is that they have a distant view of God, that God is like really far away and busy because he's like running the world. And so therefore you don't really want to bother the distant God because he's like running the world. And so those kids often will look at a distant God and think, well, I want to save up my prayers for the big stuff. I don't want to talk to God. I don't want to bother him with the little stuff. I'm going to save up for the big stuff. So when you're trying to get a kid who has a view of a distant God, they're not going to really want to engage with him or talk to him about stuff or ask him for things because like he's far away and busy. And so God's distant from them and they're distant from him, and they don't really feel that sort of love or connection. Other kids sometimes have a angry view of God. There was a child who was once drawing me a picture of her and God, and she drew a picture of God with a really angry face stomping on her. She was on the ground in the picture and God's foot was on her. And she drew the picture and she showed me and she says, God hates me. And I'm like, what is going on? And I said, God doesn't hate you. What? Tell me more about why you think God hates you. And she said, my dad started smoking again. And I learned in school that when you smoke, it can kill you. And therefore God must hate me to let my dad smoke. And I was like, okay. Wow, your brain got real confused there. And so we had to unwind that one. I had to talk to her about all sorts of stuff to help unwind that, because she had put together different pieces of information into a certain view of God. And so therefore she was angry at God and she thought God was angry at her. Other kids have a jolly view of God, almost like a Santa Claus, where they think that God just wants them to be happy all the time and God wants them to perform for him and to worship him to make him happy, and that our job is to just make God happy, and then if we make him happy enough, he'll give us good things. And so therefore, if good things aren't happening to them, they think, well, they haven't performed good enough for God. And so then they're in this performance mode for God, and then they get tired of that. They don't want to do that. Other kids have, I could go on, I think I probably have like 10 versions of common things of God. The jolly God, the distant God, the angry God, the switchy-uppy God, the God who's like angry all the time and then he's really happy, and then you can never, he's unpredictable and he's chaotic. Or you have the mysterious God that you can never know, and you have the buddy Jesus who's like always your friend, and Jesus is your sidekick and has no personality of his own and does whatever you want. And so kids get bored with that kind of God. Kids put together all sorts of warped views of God. Teenagers, do this. This is what teenagers are excellent at. I've talked to teenagers who are like, I could never believe in a God who gives babies cancer. And I'm like, well, that's a really specific view of God. Tell me more about that. Because they get these warped views. And our job as parents and carers and churches is to know these warped views are going to happen, because that is just a process of putting together information and walking alongside of them and helping pull out those unhelpful beliefs, those places where their understanding gets tangled, to draw them into conversation. Because if left on their own with these thoughts, they then start reacting to it. They then start dismissing God or walking away from him or disliking him, because they have this view that we haven't heard yet. And so the job of parents and carers and churches, but more so parents and carers, is to walk along kids and keep the conversation going. Have wondering conversations. about God with your kids. Talk about stuff that they're wrestling with or not quite sure about, to create an open conversation space about these things is really, really important. And so there's a couple of ways that we could do that. One is ask questions that don't have right answers. Actually, before I tell you that, I'm going to tell you two more stories. Just examples of things that you might hear. So one thing is to just be aware of what they're saying, because often kids will say things and you go, that's weird, and then you just let it go. And when you hear kids say something a bit weird, go, and then register it in your head. So there was a dad who was saying that his teenager was talking about his friend who's sick, and the dad said, we should be praying for him. Just sort of like, hey, I'll be praying. You can be praying too for him. And the kid said, don't worry about it. He doesn't know God. And then sort of walked away. And the dad was like, what? And so later brought it up with the kid and said, hey, a little bit ago, you said that we didn't need to pray for your friend because he didn't know God. Tell me more about that. And the kid's like, well, yeah, because God only helps people who believe in him. And the dad was like, tell me more about where you got that. And they had this whole conversation about God and who he helps and why he helps and what prayer is for. But that could have easily just gone. And this kid had this view that God didn't care about anyone who didn't believe in him. And that needed to be rooted out and taken and understood, and what's God's heart for people who don't know him, and all of that stuff. There was another time, there was a woman who came to faith, and she came to church on the following Sunday. So she became a Christian like on Tuesday and brought her kids on the Sunday. And I had her kids in the kids ministry. And so we did like God being with you and God being with you always and loving to be with you. And we came out and the mom said, hey, how was church? And the girl looked at her, she was like 12. And the girl looked at her and said, well, we learned that God is creepy. And I was like, what? And the mom was like, what? And she was like, yeah, we learned that God watches you all the time, even when you're in the shower. That's creepy. And I was like, oh no. I mean, technically, I don't think I said that, but I did say God is with you always. And I say he was watching. And in her head, she was just got it all warped. And the mom's looking at me like, what are you doing? And she was looking at me like, fix it. And I'm like, well, you're the parent, you fix it. And so she turned to her kid and she said this. She said, I don't think God is creepy, because I think of it like this. I love watching you when you don't know I'm watching you. I love how you are kind to your brother. I love seeing when you don't think no one's watching. You're kind to your brother and you build him up and you take care of him, and that just warms my heart. I love watching you when you get ready in the morning and you do this little shoulder jiggle when you look at yourself in the mirror like, yeah. And that just makes me want to cry, because you've done that ever since you were like a year old. And I love when you just read a book or when you eat bread. I just love you so much, and I love watching you. And I think that's like how God watches us. I think it's because he loves us so much, and he loves seeing all of those moments that to anybody else don't matter, but to him are precious. And that's what I think. And the girl turned to her and goes, that's okay then. And she was absolutely fine. It like broke something over her of how she was so like, ugh, God is creepy. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh no, God loves me. And it completely transformed her, and how she engaged with church, and she came to faith, and she met with Jesus, and it was this whole thing. But it started, I think, from that moment of a parent unwinding a wrong view. And so how do we keep these conversations going? How do we allow these spaces? Well, one, ask questions that don't have right answers. Allow those things to be happening in your family. Talk about things like the Bible says God made the world in 7 days, whether you believe they're days or seasons or whatever, but it says on the seventh one, well, he made it in 6 days, and on the seventh day he rested. But like when I rest, I love reading books, and when your dad rests, he likes climbing mountains. What did God do when God rested? That's an interesting conversation. Or Did Jesus ever fancy anyone in high school? That's an interesting conversation. Have interesting conversations. On the Parenting for Faith website, there are free downloads, and there's 101 questions to start interesting conversations. And at the end of every podcast, there's an interesting question to have a conversation with your kids. Because the more you can just have these conversations, the better. If you're reading a book, and you're like, I'm not sure I agree with that, then say, I'm reading a Christian book and I'm not sure I agree with that. When you listen to a sermon, say, I'm not sure how I feel. What do you think about this? The sermon guy said this. I'm not sure what I think. And let your kids have these conversations so that when they say something weird about God, they're used to this conversational method that we have of you going, oh, tell me more about that. Oh, interesting. You've changed your mind about anything. Sexuality, who God is, how he works. Tell me more. Tell me more about that. Where'd you get that? And very interesting. Some of your kids may have watched a video on YouTube or something, and they'll say, oh, I heard it on YouTube. You're like, I would love to read that or listen to that, but send it to me. And you have these conversations so that talking about God is normal and not having the right answer is normal. Your kids will have questions, and you may feel like you do not know the right answers, and that's okay. I don't know is really good, because if your kids think that you have all the right answers, then they feel like they have to have all the right answers, or they feel like if you don't have the answer, then it all crumbles down, and they've found the crux of what Christianity, they've disproved Christianity, as opposed to the fact that you don't know everything, and you probably won't know everything till you stand before Jesus, and even then probably not. And so you're okay with not knowing stuff, and this is how you deal with it. And so modeling for them how to wrestle with big ideas and how to have answers and not have answers is really good. So often we get stumped when a kid asks us a question and we feel bad that we don't know an answer. And so this is how I suggest you answer any question that pops up. 4 steps, if you want to, just a little side thing. If you have a question that pops up, a kid asks a question, does my gerbil get to go to heaven? And you're like, I don't know what to do with that. 4 steps. Okay, you can answer any question with these 4 steps. 1, what do you think? Because sometimes a kid asks a question and they don't really have the question, they just want to talk. So, and it buys you time. So 1, what do you think? And let them talk. Just see what's going on in their brains. You may discover wrong views. You may find it just interesting. They may say they don't know. Interesting. The second thing to do is say, what do we know? Interesting. Well, what we know is that there is a heaven, totally real, and that is, someplace I'm looking forward to going to, because that's a place where we can be forever with Jesus. Fantastic. That's, I think, all I know. The third thing you do is what we don't know. What I don't know is if in the Bible it talks about the animals that are on earth going to heaven. What I do know is sometimes it mentions things like the lion will lay down with the lamb. Whether that's just a phrase or whether there'll actually be animals in heaven, I don't know. And if there are animals in heaven, are they the earth animals that go to heaven? I don't think so. My brain says I don't think so. But actually, it's something I don't know, and we can investigate further. And then the 4th thing that you say is how I cope with this not knowing, or how I've landed on this. So to say, it's a really good question. And in my life, when I had a dog and I lost my dog when I was 10 years old, I remember being so sad and wanting to see my dog again. And I really wanted to know whether I would see my dog again, because I knew I'd see my grandma, but I didn't know if I would see my dog again. That made me really sad. And one of the things that I know now that I wish I had known now is I can tell God how I feel about those things. So now when I'm sad and I feel like I've lost something, I tell God, I'm feeling all of these things, and this is what makes me sad, and this is how I feel about it, and I don't know the answer, but if I can see him again, I'd love that. But God, I'm just really grateful that we have that dog. Should we chat to God now about how we feel about our dog, our gerbil dying? And you can lead that kid into connecting with God if you want, or you could just tell them the story of how you've managed to land that in your head. And how you connect with God about that. You can do that about any question. You may know loads about the question. You may know nothing about the question, but you figured it out. And if your answer is, what a great question, what do you think? What a great question. I know nothing about that. I mean, absolutely nothing about that. So what do I do when I don't know anything about that? We ambush people that we know, because there's loads of people who know these things. We could try to Google it, but who knows where we're going to get answers from that. And so you might want to try it, you might not. Who do we think would know that answer? Let's find them on Sunday. And we write it on a Post-it note, and then we go ambush them on Sunday and be like, we had this question. And if they don't know, we go find someone else. Because a question is just an invitation into an interesting adventure. And so when you answer those questions, you're like, what a great question. Let's investigate it. Let's find it out. Let's look it up and teach them how to find that. Use the concordance. Questions are really great because it's not just about finding the answer. It's about figuring out how to hold all of those things we know in tension and how to connect with God in it. So those are the things that I would suggest. So I'm going to stop because that's a lot. What we talked about in this session is about framing and how important it is to help kids see God and explain how to engage with him, whether it's in the world, whether it's through the news, whether it's watching TV, whether it's doing something at church, saying this is what you're looking at and this is how to engage with it. And the second thing we talked about was how to unwind wrong views of God, how to pay attention to what they're saying, how to notice when they're getting a warped view, and how to draw out those things in conversations, from asking questions that don't have the right answers, to just noticing what they're saying and saying, tell me more about it, to answering questions that pop up with those 4 steps of what do you think, what do we know, what do we not know, and how I cope with it. There are loads of ways of unwinding these wrong views and help them set them on a more aligned path. And so those things I would suggest that you have a chat about. You might want to tell stories of times that people framed things for you that you went from, I'm not sure what that is, to, wow, I understand it now, and I know how to engage with it. Or you might want to talk about the wrong views that you've had and the conversations that are significant, or how you create a culture in your family of talking about God in normal, everyday ways. Or you might want to say, I disagree with everything this crazy lady just said, and have a good conversation about that. But for now, have a good discussion. We have covered 3 of the 5 tools.